There's a specific kind of silence that lives in the mind of the formerly gifted child. It isn't a peaceful silence. It isn't the quiet of a monk or the stillness of a lake at dawn. It is the silence of an engine that has stalled on the highway, while cars full of normal people, people you were told you would surpass, go speeding past you. You know this silence. You live in it. It's the paralyzing gap between what you assume you should be doing and what you are actually doing, which is probably staring at a ceiling or scrolling through a phone, paralyzed by a task that shouldn't be difficult, yet feels like climbing Everest without oxygen. Someone, somewhere, once told you a lie. It was a beautiful lie, wrapped in praise and delivered with a smile. They told you, you have so much potential. Do you remember how that felt? It felt like a promise. It felt like you had been handed a golden ticket. Things came easily to you. You read above your grade level. You understood concepts before the teacher finished explaining them. You were the old soul, the pleasure to have in class. But potential is not a promise. It is a debt. And now, 20 or 30 years later, the debt collector is knocking at the door and you are hiding in the dark, wondering where the magic went. You feel like a fraud. You feel that any day now, everyone is going to realize that the smart kid was actually just a child who was good at following rules and memorizing patterns. You look at your peers, people who didn't get the gold stars, who didn't get the special attention, and they seem fine. They are building lives. They are finishing things. Meanwhile, you are sitting amidst a graveyard of started projects, half-written novels, abandoned hobbies, and vague ambitions. You aren't lazy. I know you aren't lazy, because the war inside your head is exhausting. You are tired. You are tired of the weight of a mask you put on when you were 6 years old. The world sees a failure to launch, but I see a nervous system that has been running on red line voltage since kindergarten, waiting for the inevitable fuse to blow. Let's talk about why you crashed. And let's talk about why it was the only thing you could possibly do to survive. Let's create a picture of a child. We'll call him the Little Diplomat. The Little Diplomat learns, very early on, that love is not something given freely. Love is something that is transacted. He notices that when he is quiet, when he is compliant, and most importantly, when he performs high intelligence, the adults around him light up. Their anxiety decreases. They smile. This child is an observer. He has high pattern recognition. This is the biological root of what we call giftedness. It's not magic. It's a hypersensitive nervous system. He notices the micro expressions on his mother's face. He senses the tension in his father's voice. To stay safe, to secure his attachment, he creates a persona. In Jungian psychology, the persona is the mask we wear to interface with the world. But for the gifted child, the mask becomes fused to the skin. He realizes that being smart is his currency. It is the only thing that makes him special. It is the only thing that makes him worthy. So he stops taking risks. Think about the neuroplasticity of a developing brain. If every time you succeed without trying, you get a dopamine hit of praise, your brain wires itself to believe that success should be effortless. You're so smart, they said. They didn't say, you worked really hard on that. They praised your nature, not your action. This creates a terrifying logic. If I have to try hard, it means I'm not smart. If I struggle, it means the gift is gone. If I fail, I am not just a person who failed, I am a failure of a person. So the little diplomat grows up, and eventually, the difficulty curve of life catches up to his natural talent. Maybe it happens in college, maybe it happens in the workforce, maybe it happens when he tries to write that book. Suddenly, raw intelligence isn't enough. The problems require grit, repetition, and the humility to be a beginner. But the gifted adult cannot bear to be a beginner. To be a beginner is to be stupid. To be a beginner is to be vulnerable. So, the defense mechanism kicks in. This is where the crash happens. It's not laziness. It is a freeze response. It is your amygdala, the lizard brain, hijacking your system because it perceives the possibility of failure as a literal threat to your survival. You procrastinate, not because you don't want to do the work, but because if you wait until the last minute and fail, you can say, well, I didn't have enough time. But if you try your absolute hardest and fail, that would confirm your deepest, darkest fear, that you are empty, that you are average. Psychologists often refer to this as the fixed mindset. but that term is too sterile for the pain you feel. This is a spiritual fracture. You have split yourself into two people. There is the golden child, the image of potential, the one who is going to change the world. And there is the shadow self, the part of you that is terrified, messy, perhaps a bit mediocre, and desperate to just rest. You have spent your entire life trying to murder the shadow self. You stuff it down, you shame it, you tell yourself you just need to get organized. You buy the planners, you watch the productivity videos, but you can't organize your way out of a trauma response. The crash isn't a malfunction. The crash is your soul pulling the emergency brake because it refuses to be a performance monkey for one more mile. Here is the counterintuitive truth that you might not want to hear, but you need to hear. Your potential has become your prison. The very thing you are mourning, that radiant future where you are celebrated, successful, and extraordinary, is the thing that is killing you. We need to look at the concept of the puer Aeternus, Latin for the eternal child. Carl Jung spoke of this archetype as someone who remains psychologically an adolescent. The puer is full of life, full of vision, full of potential. But the puer cannot land. He cannot touch the earth. The puer hates boundaries. He hates routine. He hates the boring work of paying bills, answering emails, or practicing a skill slowly. He wants to fly. He wants the ascent, but he refuses the descent. Because you were told you were special, you developed an allergy to the ordinary. You believe that if you aren't doing something magnificent, you are wasting your life. But look closely at that belief. Where does it come from? It is the voice of the parent who needed you to be extraordinary to validate their own worth. It is the voice of a school system that valued test scores over character. You are addicted to the fantasy of what you could be, because the reality of what you are feels insufficient. The pivot is this: you do not need to live up to your potential. You need to dismantle it. The reason you crash is that you are trying to skip the sucking phase. You want to write the symphony without learning the scales. You want to be the CEO without doing the grunt work. Because to do the grunt work is to admit you are just like everyone else. And that is the great fear, ordinariness. But let's invert the problem. What if your capacity for laziness is actually wisdom? What if your procrastination is your intuition screaming at you that the path you are on is inauthentic? You have been forcing yourself to climb a mountain you don't even like, just because you were told you were good at climbing. The crash is your shadow breaking through the floorboards. It is demanding to be seen. It is saying, I am not a machine. I am not a grade. I am not a projection of your parents' unfulfilled dreams. I am a human being, and I am tired. Your suffering comes from the gap between your persona, the genius, and your reality, the human. The wider the gap, the more anxiety you feel. The only way to close the gap is not to raise your reality up to the impossible standard of the persona. It is to lower the persona down to the reality of the earth. It is to crash, deliberately. So, how do we integrate this? How do we move from the paralyzed prodigy to a functioning, whole human being? I am not going to give you a 5-step plan to productivity. You have enough lists. I am asking for a philosophical death. You must kill the gifted kid. You must hold a funeral for the version of you that was going to save the world, or win the Nobel Prize, or be famous by 25. You have to grieve that loss. Cry for it. It was a beautiful dream, and it kept you safe for a long time, but it is over. Once you bury the golden child, you are left with something far more powerful: the novice. The novice is allowed to be bad at things. The novice is allowed to ask stupid questions. The novice requires repetition. You must reclaim the right to be average. This sounds like a defeat, but it is actually the ultimate liberation. If you are allowed to be average, the paralyzing weight of expectation vanishes. If you are allowed to produce garbage, you can finally start working. Writer Anne Lamott calls this the shitty first draft. Jung calls this the descent. You must descend into the soil of your own life. You must engage with the mundane, the dishes, the emails, the awkward first attempts at a new hobby. Find the joy in doing rather than the desperate need for having done. When you were a child, you didn't draw pictures to get into an art gallery. You drew because the friction of the crayon on the paper felt good. You need to find that friction again. There is a concept in Japanese pottery called kintsugi. When a pot breaks, the artist doesn't throw it away. They mend the cracks with gold lacquer. The bowl becomes more beautiful because it has been broken. The history is visible. You are not a broken vessel waiting to be thrown out. You are in the process of becoming gold. But the gold doesn't come from your talent. It comes from your fractures. It comes from your acceptance of your own limitations. So, here's your permission slip. You don't have to be special. You don't have to be extraordinary. You just have to be here. Step off the pedestal. The air is too thin up there anyway. Come down here, to the ground, where the rest of us are. It's messy, and it's slow, and it's often boring, but it's real. And for the first time in your life, it's yours.